The case making national headlines tonight, the emotionally charged murder trial in Texas. A 19-year-old high school track star now accused of fatally stabbing a 17-year-old from a rival team during a track meet. The case now sharply dividing the community. And here's Morgan Norwood.
Tonight, day one in a trial that has deeply divided a Dallas suburb and made national headlines. Karmelo Anthony, now 19, charged with first-degree murder in the stabbing death of 17-year-old fellow athlete Austin Metcalf after a confrontation at a track meet last year.
Can you be en route for the stabbing? Kermelo Stadium press box. It's going to be a student athlete.
Prosecutors called it a sneak surprise attack, showing the jury grainy surveillance of the bleachers where it all happened that rainy morning after Anthony sat under a tent belonging to Metcalf's team. Austin's twin brother Hunter was there.
He started getting aggressive and talking reckless. And my brother stepped in and said, "You need to move." And he's like, "Make me move."
And prosecutors say when Metcalf tried moving Anthony, he pulled out a knife. Metcalf's last words, "I've been stabbed," before he died in his brother's arms. But Anthony's defense arguing he acted in self-defense, reacting in a split second of fear, chaos, saying after he defended himself with the knife, he ran. He didn't stab again. He dropped the knife. The case fueling debate and racial tension. Metcalf's father has insisted it's not about race. Both families have faced threats.
To the family who experienced the loss, my heart truly goes out to you. We believe in legal process, and that is where the truth will come out.
Tonight, one civil rights organization voicing outrage that there are no black jurors deciding Anthony's fate.
A track meet, hundreds of students, coaches, parents, timers starting guns. It is supposed to be the most ordinary Wednesday morning of the school year. Then the storm comes. Heavy rain, thunder cracking across the sky, events delayed, athletes scrambling for cover, ducking under tents, pressing into bleachers, waiting it out. That is when two strangers end up under the same tent. They have never met before. They do not know each other's names. They do not know each other's stories. But in less than 2 minutes, one of them will be dead, and the other will be sitting in the back of a police car, crying, asking the officer a question that will haunt this entire case. Is he going to be okay? Then, almost in the same breath, he asks something else. Could what I did be considered self-defense? One teenager, one knife, one stab wound to the chest. And a verdict that split an entire nation down the middle. Because this was not just a murder case. This became a racial flashpoint, a social media war, a story of death threats, doxing, protests, and politicians, a story where both families lost everything even before the trial began. And at the center of it all, two 17-year-old boys who did not know each other, who should never have crossed paths, but did. On the morning of April 2, 2025, at a track meet in Frisco, Texas. Everything you think you know about this case, you need to hear the full story first. Because the truth is more complicated than the headlines, more painful than the social media posts, and more human than any of the outrage that followed. April 2, 2025 started like any other competition day. David Kuykendall Stadium filled up early. Athletes stretched, warmed up, checked their spikes. Coaches reviewed heat sheets. Parents found spots in the bleachers. The energy was familiar, organized chaos, the kind that comes with any large school event. Austin Metcalf was there representing Memorial High School. 17 years old, a junior. Built like the linebacker, he was one of the best on Memorial's football team, recently voted MVP. He was also a track athlete, moving between two sports the way only truly gifted kids do. He had a twin brother, Hunter, who competed alongside him. The two of them had grown up playing football together, pushing each other, sharing the same jersey numbers in different sizes. By all accounts, Austin was exactly the kind of son parents talk about when they talk about doing something right. Hardworking, athletic, well-liked. That morning, he was just another competitor waiting for his events to begin. Karmelo Anthony was there representing Centennial High School. Same age, same city, completely different world. Born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Karmelo was the oldest of 4 children. His family had relocated to Texas, and he had built something real for himself there. Captain of both the football and track teams at Centennial, holding down 2 part-time jobs while still maintaining enough academic standing to be on track for graduation just weeks away. No criminal record, no history of violence, no connection whatsoever to Austin Metcalf. These were not rivals. They were not enemies. They were strangers who happened to be athletes at competing schools in the same district. That is all they were, until that morning. Then the sky opened up. Thunderstorms rolled across Frisco with little warning. Heavy rain hammered the stadium. Lightning pushed the meet officials to delay events. Athletes who had been warming up in the open were now scrambling, looking for shelter, looking for cover, looking for anywhere dry enough to wait it out. Karmelo Anthony moved toward Memorial High School's tent. It was not his school's tent. That much is not disputed. But according to testimony presented during trial, this was not unusual behavior. A coach from Centennial testified that athletes from different schools regularly sheltered together, socialized, shared space at these kinds of events. Centennial had not even brought their own tent that day due to staffing shortages, leaving their athletes without a designated area. Anthony sat down inside the tent. What happened next depends on who you ask. And during this trial, the jury heard from many people who were standing right there. Hunter Metcalf, Austin's twin, noticed Anthony inside the tent and told him to leave. That much is consistent across most accounts. What follows gets murkier. Austin then got involved. Words were exchanged. According to multiple student witnesses, Anthony was asked to move as many as 15 times. The atmosphere inside that tent shifted, rain still hammering outside. A group of students now focused on one boy they did not recognize, telling him he did not belong there. At some point, Anthony reportedly said words that would be repeated throughout this entire trial. "Touch me and see what happens." He kept his hands inside his backpack as he said it. Witnesses said he warned them he had something in there. The tension under that tent was building in real time, 2 minutes of back and forth that must have felt much longer to everyone inside it. Then Austin Metcalf made physical contact. Witnesses differ on exactly what that looked like. Some said he pushed Anthony. The arrest report states he stood up and pushed Anthony to get him out of the tent. One student testified that Metcalf grabbed Anthony before anything else happened. What is not disputed is what came next. Karmelo Anthony reached into that backpack and pulled out a black folding knife, 5 inches long, legal to carry in Texas, but very much against school policy. He stabbed Austin Metcalf once, directly in the chest. The blade pierced his heart. Austin stumbled backward, ran down the bleachers, grabbed his chest, and told everyone around him to get help. He was not conscious by the time law enforcement arrived. Athletic trainers were already performing chest compressions. He was rushed to the hospital. He did not make it. Austin Metcalf, 17 years old, MVP linebacker, twin brother, was pronounced dead within minutes of arriving at the emergency room. And just like that, a rain delay at a track meet became a murder scene. In the immediate aftermath, the stadium fell apart. Students who had been waiting on their events were now witnesses to a homicide. Coaches who had been reviewing heat sheets were now managing panic. Parents in the bleachers had no idea what had just happened under that tent, only that something had gone terribly wrong. Police arrived to find Austin Metcalf already unresponsive. Karmelo Anthony had not run far. When officers located him and told him to keep his hands raised, his first words were not silence. They were not a request for a lawyer. They were not denial. He said, "I was protecting myself." He was emotional, crying, visibly shaken by what he had just done. As officers placed him into custody and walked him toward the patrol car, he spoke again. He put his hands on me. I told him not to. Then, sitting in the back seat of that police car, he turned to the officer and asked about the boy he had just stabbed. Was he going to be okay? The answer, though Anthony may not have received it in that moment, was no. And then came the question that prosecutors would return to again and again throughout this entire trial. Anthony asked the officer whether what he had done could be considered self-defense. He was 17 years old, sitting in handcuffs, asking a police officer to help him understand if he had just committed a crime or survived one. That single question would become the fault line running through everything that followed: the legal arguments, the public debate, the racial tension, the national outrage. Was Karmelo Anthony a murderer? Or was he a frightened teenager who made a deadly decision in a split second? The Collin County justice system began processing the case almost immediately. Anthony was charged with first-degree murder and transported to jail. Under Texas law, defendants aged 17 and older are prosecuted as adults. There would be no juvenile proceedings, no lighter framework. This was adult court, adult charges, adult consequences. His bond was initially set at $1 million. Then on April 14, just under 2 weeks after the stabbing, Judge Angela Tucker reduced it to $250,000. She cited his clean record, his academic standing, his athletic achievements, and his role as a first-time offender. He was released the same day, under strict conditions, supervised at all times by an adult, required to check in with the court every Friday, banned from social media, and prohibited from any contact with the Metcalf family. That bond reduction lit a fire. What had already been a story with racial dimensions, a black teenager killing a white teenager at a public school event, now became something much larger and far more dangerous. The internet arrived, and it brought everything with it. Social media turned the case into a battlefield. White nationalist groups framed Austin Metcalf's death as a symbol of racial violence against white Americans. Black nationalist voices pushed back, arguing that Karmelo Anthony was being railroaded by a system that had never protected young black men. Viral posts spread faster than facts. Misinformation followed close behind. Anthony's family had raised over $500,000 through a crowdfunding campaign on GiveSendGo to cover legal costs. Almost immediately, fabricated stories began circulating online, claiming the family had used donated funds to purchase a luxury home worth nearly $1 million and a new car. Snopes investigated and confirmed the claims were completely false, but the damage was already spreading across platforms before the correction reached anyone. The harassment escalated into something dangerous. Anthony and his family were relocated to an undisclosed location after a documented surge of death threats, physical intimidation at their home, and what advocates described as coordinated targeting. Judge Tucker, the same judge who had reduced the bond, was doxxed and received multiple threats. The FBI opened an investigation. The local sheriff's office launched one too. But the Metcalf family was not spared either. Austin's mother and father both had their homes swatted, armed SWAT teams showing up with weapons drawn, responding to false emergency calls designed to terrorize. Both fathers were eventually forced to leave their jobs because the harassment followed them there too. Two grieving families, two teenagers, one dead, one in custody, and an entire country using their pain as ammunition for arguments that had nothing to do with either of them. Austin Metcalf's own father stood up and said enough. When the group Protect White Americans held a protest at the very stadium where his son was killed, demanding Anthony be returned to custody, Metcalf's father confronted the organizer directly. "You are trying to create more racial divide than bridging the gap. I do not condone anything you do." He asked them to remove his son's photograph from their website. A father, still in the earliest stages of grief, spending energy he did not have pushing back against people weaponizing his child's death for an agenda Austin never stood for. Meanwhile, the legal machinery kept moving. A grand jury indicted Anthony on murder charges in June 2025. His attorney entered a not guilty plea and confirmed the defense strategy, self-defense. The argument would be that Anthony had feared for his physical safety, that he had been outnumbered, that the boy who confronted him was significantly larger, and that the stabbing was a reaction born from fear rather than intention. Jury selection began in June 2026 at the Collin County Courthouse in McKinney, Texas, with Judge John Roach, Jr. presiding. Nearly 600 people were considered for the jury pool. Then came the moment that added yet another layer of controversy to an already combustible case. The prosecution struck 3 black female jurors from the pool. The defense immediately raised a Batson challenge, a legal objection arguing the strikes were racially motivated. Prosecutors responded that the women were removed for a race-neutral reason. They were all teachers of school-aged children. Judge Roach sided with the prosecution and allowed the strikes. When the jury was finally seated, there was not a single black juror among them. In a case defined by race, watched by the entire country, with a black defendant's life hanging in the balance, the trial that followed would last just under a week. But the arguments it would stir up about self-defense, about race, about justice, were not going anywhere. The courtroom at Collin County Courthouse was unlike most murder trials. Judge John Roach, Jr. had already made decisions that signaled how seriously he understood the weight of public attention surrounding these proceedings. Electronics were banned inside. A gag order was placed on everyone involved, restricting what attorneys, witnesses, and family members could say publicly. And in a move described as uncommon for Collin County, the jury was sequestered after closing arguments, kept away from the outside world and everything it was saying about this case. Because the outside world was saying a lot. Supporters of both families maintained a constant presence outside the courthouse throughout the trial. Far-right activist Jake Lang rallied with a crowd and publicly called for Anthony to be lynched. Arguments erupted between opposing camps. Deputies intervened multiple times. Even among those who supported Metcalf, confrontations broke out. The atmosphere around that building carried the same heat as the arguments raging on every platform online. Inside, though, the process moved with the cold precision of a criminal trial. Opening statements landed on June 4. Collin County First Assistant District Attorney Bill Werskey stepped before the jury and made the prosecution's position unmistakably clear. This was not self-defense. This was not a split-second reaction. This was, in his exact framing, a provoked, unjustified murder. Anthony had deliberately antagonized Metcalf, waited for physical contact, then produced a concealed weapon and used it. Werskey described the stabbing as a sneak attack. He told jurors directly that race had nothing to do with this case. What mattered, he said, was the sequence of events and the choice Anthony made. Defense attorney Michael Howard countered with a different picture entirely. He argued that Anthony had been seated and surrounded when the confrontation began, that Metcalf, who outweighed Anthony by 50 to 60 pounds, had made first contact, that his client had reacted in a single chaotic moment, surrounded, physically threatened, with no time to calculate or retreat. Howard described it as fear, not aggression, not premeditation. Then the witnesses began. Prosecutors called 21 of them before resting their case. Student after student took the stand and described what they had seen under that tent. Multiple witnesses placed Anthony as the one who had escalated tension, keeping his hands in his backpack, issuing warnings, refusing repeated requests to leave. Several described asking him to move as many as 15 times before the confrontation turned physical. Their testimony painted Anthony not as a cornered teenager, but as someone who had created the confrontation deliberately and arrived at it armed. The medical examiner's testimony was the kind that settles over a courtroom like fog and does not lift. Collin County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Elizabeth Ventura described the wound in clinical, precise language that somehow made it worse. The blade had entered Austin Metcalf's chest and pierced his heart. The wound was large, gaping. She told jurors plainly it was not survivable. Prosecutors placed autopsy photographs in front of the jury. Whatever doubt might have existed about the physical reality of what happened under that tent disappeared in that moment. Jurors also watched body camera footage from officers at the scene. They were shown the folding knife recovered from the bleachers, 5 inches long, capable of being opened quickly, as prosecutors demonstrated in real time. They saw photographs of Anthony's backpack and the crime scene. They heard the 911 calls placed by panicked students and coaches in the minutes after the stabbing. The defense called their own witnesses. Anthony's coach from Centennial testified that sharing tents between schools was completely normal at these kinds of events, directly contradicting the narrative that Anthony had entered hostile territory by sitting under Memorial's canopy. A Frisco Memorial student offered a different version of the physical confrontation, saying Metcalf had grabbed Anthony before the knife appeared. Under cross-examination, however, that same witness acknowledged that Anthony had provoked him. A police officer testified that carrying a 5-inch folding knife is entirely legal in Texas, but the prosecution's response to that point was simple and effective. Legal to carry in public does not mean appropriate to bring to a school athletic event. No one else under that tent had a weapon, only Anthony. Anthony himself never took the stand. Closing arguments came on June 9. Wersky returned to the central question with the kind of directness that juries remember. You do not get to meet a shove with a stab, especially when you provoked the shove in the first place. He called the killing senseless, plain murder. The jury retired to deliberate. 3 hours later, they returned. Guilty. First-degree murder. The verdict was read at 1:35 in the afternoon. Karmelo Anthony, 19 years old by the time the trial concluded, sat at the defense table as the word landed. The jury had rejected the self-defense argument entirely. They had rejected the sudden passion claim during sentencing, which would have reduced his potential punishment range. They gave him 35 years. Austin Metcalf's parents and his twin brother Hunter each delivered victim impact statements, addressing Anthony directly. What they said in that courtroom, after more than a year of grief, harassment, death threats, and watching their son's death become a culture war, belongs to them. But the weight of those statements filled the room in a way that reporters described as devastating. Anthony's mother was the only witness called during the punishment phase. She stood before the jury that had just convicted her son and asked them for mercy. She said he was sorry. She asked them to consider who he had been before that morning, the team captain, the part-time worker, the student weeks away from graduation, the oldest child of 4. The jury deliberated again. 35 years. On June 10, the day after sentencing, Anthony was transferred to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and transported to the Wallace PAC unit in Navasota, Texas. His attorneys filed notice of appeal the same day, stating there were several significant legal issues worth putting before a higher court. Outside the courthouse, the arguments continued. Cardi B called the verdict disgusting. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett said Anthony was among many young people who had been overprosecuted. The Collin County NAACP said they were enraged and raised questions about fairness and representation. Republican lawmakers called it justice, long overdue. The new Black Panther Party called the outcome racist. Metcalf's supporters celebrated. Dominique Alexander of the Next Generation Action Network pledged $10,000 toward Anthony's appeal and pointed directly at the absence of black jurors as reason enough to question the entire process. And through all of it, Metcalf's father remained the most measured voice in a story that had almost no measured voices at all. He had lost his son. He had been swatted in his own home. He had been doxxed. He had watched strangers use Austin's face on protest signs for causes Austin would never have endorsed. And still, he kept pulling the conversation back toward something human, toward the idea that two families had been destroyed, that his son deserved to be remembered as a person and not a symbol, and that grief does not belong to any ideology. Two teenagers. One morning. 2 minutes under a tent during a rainstorm. And a wound that tore through more than one chest. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old. He deserved more time. His family deserved to watch him graduate, watch him play, watch him grow into whoever he was becoming. Karmelo Anthony was also 17 years old. Whatever the truth of that morning, whatever fear was real, and whatever calculation was made, he will spend the next 3.5 decades inside a prison in Navasota, Texas. And the rain that started all of this has long since stopped. But nothing underneath that tent has dried.